And for more on that, I'd like to welcome Levent Altan to the program. He's the Executive Director of Victim Support Europe, and he joins us from the city of Nice, where that Congress is currently taking place. Thank you so much for being with us here on Live from Paris. Now, I think the big question is an event like this simply for optics? Is it symbolic? Can Congress participants actually achieve anything palpable, in your opinion?
Well, yes, they can, but I think you have to understand what are the various goals of a Congress. It may not just be about achieving change. One of the most important aspects for victims, especially victims of terrorism, is the memory and the remembrance. And part of what these congresses do is ensure that we don't forget all the victims who have died, their family members, and the many who continue to suffer. So that is an important optic, that's an important recognition, and it's important that the state and our communities continue to hold these kinds of events. It also gives the victims themselves and organisations an opportunity to come together and to find strength in that community, and to talk about the best practices, the different ways of working, to hear that they are not alone. It's important not to forget that in many of these attacks, especially, for example, in Nice, in Paris, there are many, many foreign victims who have been affected by the attacks. And when they go back to their home countries, they're not necessarily surrounded by the community which understands what they've been through, and it gives them an opportunity to be with others. And in this final point, really, if you're thinking about achieving change, we have to listen to victims to know how to act, to know what's going wrong, to know where we're going right, and use that knowledge, use their voice and what they tell us to move forward. So we have lots of important actors here today from
I'm just going to interrupt you there because we're limited on the time that we have. You mentioned, and if you can keep it more brief, that of course an event like this is important because it's drawing attention to the events that took place, the horrific events, to what the victims are experiencing. But we can't deny that there's been a great deal of criticism, that there seems to be an immensely large gap between the announced objectives and the fact that they're not necessarily implemented.
Yes, and as Victim Support Europe, we'll always push for change. So it is within the victims' world. We work for all victims of crime. That's a clear problem. I think France is actually one of the more advanced countries. You have a state which is committed to change. Having said that, there's a lot that needs to be done. We need to make use of the knowledge from around the world in countries like the United States, in the UK, Israel, where they've done amazing work with victims of terrorism. So we do need to close that gap. That's clear, but these congresses are about helping close that gap.
Now, Levent Altan, earlier you were speaking about the victims. Earlier we heard in that report, I don't know whether you had access to it, but the victims of the Nice attack, certainly, their relatives, they're very much polarized over the Congress.
Okay, I hadn't heard about that. I don't know why they're polarized, but we have to still listen to those issues, why they have their concerns, I think, and try to take those into account. It's difficult to comment on what their concerns are without knowing about them, but with such large communities of people, we will inevitably have some level of polarization. The important thing is to listen to them and to try to see where we can address those concerns.
Thank you very much for spending time and speaking to us here on Middle East Matters, Levant and Health.